Hi there, I'm Mark Levy, your sourdough simpleton, back with another recipe. And if you can look at the stuff on this table, yes, this is a little bit of a complicated recipe. What we're going to be making is a sourdough challah. Now challah is the twisted bread, braided bread, which is served on the table for the Sabbath on Friday nights. And it's normally a very rich, very dense bread, very sweet bread. Difficult to make with sourdough, but I think we have a recipe that's going to work, so let's give it a try. It's complicated. I'll take you every step of the way, and yes, I will print the recipe on the website and attach it to the Facebook page. Now, we're going to begin by using some starter. This is active starter. I got up this morning early and fed it. It was fed yesterday and the day before that, so it's a very active starter. It's risen to the top of this jar in the past hour or two. So we're going to take 240 grams of active starter. Now, always remember, you must measure starter by weight, not by volume, because as we stir this down, the volume will decrease because the air bubbles that are trapped in the starter go away. So please do not make the mistake of saying a cup of starter, because that could be, well, it could be disastrous, quite frankly. Particularly in a recipe that is going to rely on this starter for its only rise. There's no yeast in this recipe. So 240 grams of starter. We're going to put that into the mixing bowl. I'm using a dough hook here. You could start this out with the paddle if you wanted to, but I did it both ways, and quite frankly, it seems to work just as well starting out with the dough hook as well. You want to get every bit of starter into the bowl. Next up, we're going to add some water. And this is room temperature, filtered water, about 140 grams. Which, if you really insist on knowing, is about 2/3 of a cup, but it's 140 grams. We're going to add some sugar, and this is 70 grams of sugar. I'll tell you that 120 grams of sugar is a half a cup, so you can do the math from there, but it's 70 grams of sugar. I'm going to add 10 grams, or roughly 2 teaspoons of salt. And of course, this is, as I always do, uniodized salt. And finally, 2 large eggs. And I'm going to just take a second to break up the yolks before I add them, so that the paddle doesn't have to do any more work than it has to do. And we're going to put this to mix and just mix up all these ingredients for a little while. I'm going to let this go for a few minutes just to mix everything up, and then I'll be back with the next step. Stay with me. Okay, we're back after some mixing of the initial ingredients in the bowl. Let's have a look inside and see what it looks like. Looks pretty good, nice and even mixture in the bowl. And so the next step is to add flour. Now, those of you who have been with me before know that I like to weigh and measure my flour on a paper plate. So this is 100 grams of bread flour, and we're going to slowly add this into the mixer to let it incorporate into the liquid that's already there. To that, we're going to be adding some oil. And we're going to be doing this, the flour and the oil, in portions throughout the course of this mix. So we're going to start out with 20 grams of oil. And this is vegetable oil, canola oil is what I like to use. And 20 grams on the knot. And we're going to add that in. And we're going to let that mix until it's fully incorporated. That could take up to 2 or 3 minutes at medium speed. While it's doing that, we'll take another short video break, and then I'll be back for the next step. Well, after the first 100 grams of flour and 20 grams of oil is mixed in, it's beginning to look, as you can see here, a bit like pancake batter, which is fine. It's time to add the second aliquot of, I like that word, the second aliquot of flour. Once again, 100 grams, measured in my convenient paper plate. And as this adds, you can certainly feel free to stop the mixer for a second, use your spatula to wipe down the sides of the bowl, and make sure that everything is incorporated properly. I do, and I'll show you that in a second. So another 20 grams of oil, and this will be the second addition of flour and oil. And I'll tell you what, if you look at it now, you're going to see that it's being incorporated, but it isn't quite together right now. You have flour on the outside, liquid on the inside, and it looks like a holy mess. But that's how it's supposed to look. So to incorporate everything together, we'll go ahead and scrape the bowl down a little bit and make sure everything is all incorporated. So we'll stop the mixture for a second, and just take a spatula, go around the edges. And make sure everything is incorporating nicely. Wiping it off on the hook seems like a good idea because it's right there. And again, we'll let this mix for a few minutes before we put in the third portion. There are actually going to be 4 portions of flour and oil. There's 2 are in, there are 2 more to go. So we'll see after that. With the mixing continuing, it's time to add now the third portion of flour and oil. Once again, 100 grams of flour. And 20 grams of vegetable oil. And we'll let this go for a little while. Now the dough is really beginning to thicken up. At this point, we've added 300 grams of flour. Now we started out with 240 of starter. Starter is 50% hydration. Excuse me, 50% flour. It's 100% hydration. 50% flour. So we had 120 grams of flour in the starter, and we've added 300 more. So that's 440 grams of flour that we have in there right now. Another 100 grams will take us to 540, which is about the right amount for a 1 kilogram batch of dough, which will give us 2 500-grammer, roughly a little more than 1 pound loaf of bread. And that's really where we're headed with all this. We're going to look at the consistency of the dough with the final add and see whether it needs more flour and maybe some water, and we'll go from there. But that's a judgment call that we'll make after the next addition. So we'll let this continue to mix for a little bit. I'll scrape down the sides one more time, and I'll be back with you for number 4 addition of flour and oil. So as this is mixing with the 3 aliquots of flour and oil in there, and you look at it, you get a sense that this is thickening up. There's now some more stretching of fibers, if you will, stretching of the dough as the batter goes around. So we know we're getting close. Now, of course, what your goal ultimately is, with most time you make bread in a mixer, is to have the dough come together as a dough ball in the center around the hook. And hopefully we're going to get there. So the next step is to add another 100 gram aliquot of flour. And we'll do that. And this time though, for the oil, we're only going to add 10 grams of oil. I played with this recipe and that seems to be enough at this stage. A little bit heavy on that. Okay. Okay, so we're going to let this mix again for a few more minutes. By the way, when we're done mixing, we're going to put this into a bowl to batch ferment overnight. What we're not doing with this dough, which we commonly do with bread, is the fold and stretch. Fold and stretch. And the reason we're not having to do that is this dough is getting a very good workout with the mixture to develop the gluten. So you don't really need to do that with this dough. And when we take it out of the refrigerator tomorrow, I'll show you that we can show a window pane it's ready to go. So trust me on this one. This is, although the mixing is complicated, after we do this, we put it away and we'll take it out tomorrow. So it makes it a little bit easier to do a complicated recipe. At any rate, I'm going to let this go for a little bit and then we'll be back and we'll see how it looks in the bowl. Okay? Be right back. So I want to show you how the dough looks now. It's clearly coming together, but it's still loose and isn't really forming a ball around the hook. The solution, of course, is to add a little bit more flour. So we're going to take scale and let's add about 50 grams or so. And we'll see if we can get this to form up a little bit better. So we'll add that flour in. Give it a few to mix. I think I'm going to take a spatula and just wipe down the sides a bit because it's clearly coming together better now. This dough is not going to be a dry dough. This is a sticky dough. It's a wet dough. And that's going to be good because it should give a very nice moist bread when we're finished. So don't expect to see a nice dry ball of dough because you're not going to see that. But now, you lock this. If you take a look, you can see that it's definitely coming together better. And in fact, this is about where we want the dough to be, in kind of a loose ball. So let's take it out of here. Clear the hook. And the dough is firm enough to hold some shape. See what I'm talking about? As it comes down, it's holding some shape, so you can see that. And we're going to put this into an oiled bowl. Where it's going to batch ferment in the refrigerator overnight. Now tomorrow, we're going to take it out, give it a gentle knead, because We don't want to knock air out of it. Form the loaves. Have a proof for a couple of hours, and then bake it. And because I'm not doing this for a Friday, when I would be forced to not cut the bread and look at it, because you have to wait and do that at the table for the Sabbath, we're going to be able to take a look at it. So for those of you who are curious, yes, we will see the bread at the end. All right, this is now in the bowl for batch ferment. I've got a mess to clean up before my wife gets home, and no, seriously. So we'll put this in the refrigerator to batch ferment overnight, where it will develop some more flavor, some more texture, and rise significantly from where it is right now. I'll show you where we are right now without the plastic wrap on it, and you can get a sense for how big the dough is. And tomorrow, I think it will be significantly different. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye for now. Well, good morning. This is day number 2 in our sourdough challah bake. And I want to say one thing at the outset. Yesterday it was kind of cool outside. Today it's much warmer. And if I stop talking for a moment, you may hear the song of the 17-year cicadas in the air. And they're out there, and there's nothing I can do about it. So we have to kind of live with it. All right. Our dough has been in the refrigerator overnight. And if we take a look at it now, we see that it has risen. It is not a big puffy dough though, but it has risen. And we're going to see how this works out to make a couple of challahs. First thing we're going to do is turn this dough out onto a mat. I like to use a silpat mat to handle my dough, because it upsets my wife if I use the table by itself. And this dough is very pliable. It's not sticky. It's kind of like Play-Doh, if you want to make a comparison. Put that over there. Okay. So we're going to flour it a little bit just to make sure that we can get a good surface on it. And I think it needs a little bit more flour from yesterday. It just feels a little bit soft to me, so we're going to take a few minutes and knead in some extra flour. I'm going to go ahead and use a metal bench scraper to help to manipulate this dough. Okay, so I've added some extra flour to this by basically just shaking some flour in and kneading it through. And it's now a more manageable dough. I think that if we did this the next time, I'm going to cut back on the amount of water that we added in the beginning. There may just be a little bit too much water in this dough. But the next step now will be to divide this up into 2 loaves. This whole dough weighs about a little more than 1 kilogram. So we're looking for roughly 2 500-gram loaves. And that's 512. And that's 530, so that's close enough for my work. Okay. So we'll put the parchment paper back over here on the pan. Put this one loaf over there. And now we're going to get to the business of braiding this loaf. So there are many ways to do a braid. The easy way, of course, is a 3-stranded braid, like you would braid somebody's hair. Classic ways to braid challah include 4-strand, 6-strand, and 12-strand braids. Clearly, the more strands you use, the more complicated it gets. We're going to do a 4-strand braid with this challah, which is fairly straightforward and simple, and I'll show you exactly how we're doing it. And you can expand that to 6 strands merely by adding 2 more strands, or even to go to 8. I do have a video posted, and I'll give you the link to that, for how to braid a 4 and 6 strand challah using regular dough, and this works much the same way. So we'll go from there. I do want to point out, though, before I get started, that if you take this dough and you stretch it out, you can see light through it, which is the so-called window pane test. And that's very important to know that the gluten is developed in the dough. So we'll go from there, and let's show you. Let me reset the camera a bit, and we'll show you how to do this, braid this challah. So we're going to start off with the dough as one rectangular block. Now, many places will tell you to roll these out like that. I'm lazy, so the way I do this is I just basically stretch the dough out into a rectangle, and then I'll take a bench scraper and cut up through the middle, and then cut up through the middle again, and I end up with 4 strands. So we take these 4 strands and arrange them. And for the sake of argument, we can number these 1, 2, 3, and 4, but it'll get confusing. So let's just see if we can get through this without numbering them. I'm going to put a little bit more flour on this just to prevent the strands from sticking where I don't want them to stick. You put all 4 strands together at the top. And the basic pattern goes like this. This strand goes over. This strand goes over. And then the one that was on the top, which is this one, comes down the middle and is replaced by that one. This is now on top, comes down the middle, and it's replaced by that one. This one's on top, comes down the middle, and is replaced by that one. Comes down, and is replaced by that one. Make that a little better. Comes down by that one. Comes down by that one. Comes down by that one. And they're getting kind of skinny now, so I'm going to just fake it a bit. I'll bring these all down, make them into a little ball, and tuck the ball underneath. And basically here you have a 4-stranded challah braid. Now we're going to do the same thing with the other half of the dough to make a second loaf, and then we'll go from there. Well, both loaves are now braided, and as you can see, we have them in the sheet pan ready to go into the warmer. We will allow these to rise for several hours until they approximately double in size, and then we'll go ahead and bake them. Once again, the modification I suggested along the way was maybe cutting back on the water a little bit when you make the dough. You have to experiment with it. A lot depends on the humidity in your environment, on the type of flour you're using and like that. So you kind of have to play with this a little bit. But the result should be a really enjoyable sourdough challah. So now we're going to put this into rise for the proof, and we'll see you back in a couple hours and go ahead and bake this challah. See you then. Well, it's been about 3 hours that the challah has been rising, and what you can see now is that it's lost a little bit of its definition of the braid as the dough has risen. Likely that may be due to a little bit too much water in the dough, as we were discussing, but we'll see how it tastes anyway. We're going to put an egg wash on this, which is basically 1 egg with a half an egg shell of water, and we'll stir that up. Like that. And then we'll go ahead and brush this egg mixture onto the challahs. And this will give it a very nice shiny crust. Now, the question of toppings always seems to come up. Certainly, one can just do the egg wash with no topping at all. But there are many things that are traditionally put on challahs as well. You can use sesame seeds. You can use poppy seeds. Many people will use like an everything spice, like an everything bagel spice. You can use salt if you want to do that. There are people who do streusel toppings for challahs. Believe me, if you look it up, you'll see there are literally endless toppings for challah, and they would apply to the sourdough challah as surely as they would a regular challah. So we'll go ahead and put a little bit of sesame seeds on one of these just to get a difference between the two of them. And this will now go into an oven at, we're going to do it on 325 convection bake, which would be 350 regular bake. And we'll go for about 25 minutes, see how it looks on top, check the internal temperature, looking for a temperature of 190 to 200, and then take it out of the oven and we'll show it to you then. So into the oven it goes. We'll see you when it comes out. So the challah was baking in the oven at 325 degrees Fahrenheit, convection oven, for about 25 minutes. We checked the internal temperature of the bread, and it was exactly 195 degrees, which is where you want to be for bread baking. Took it out, let it cool for about 25 minutes or so, and now here we are. Let's cut into this bread and we'll see how it looks. I'll let you take a look at the bread while I'm cutting so you can see how beautiful this loaf really is. The definition of the braids is a little bit blunted by the sourdough, but now what we have here is a beautiful bread which is absolutely delicious looking. And when we taste it, I mean, this is challah. It's a dense bread with almost a cake-like consistency, a little bit on the sweeter side. Tastes really good. Would be great just with some butter on it, or used for a sandwich, whoever you like. I think you'll enjoy this bread. It may take some tinkering. You may have to use a little bit more or less water, a little bit more or less flour, depending on your situation. But let me hear from you. If you bake it, let me hear how it came out for you and what modifications you did as well. In the meantime, please do check out the rest of the videos here on the Sourdough Simpleton. Check out the Facebook page and the website as well, sourdoughsimpleton.com. And please be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. For now, this is Mark Levy, your Sourdough Simpleton, saying goodbye, and we'll see you next time with another fun thing to do.